I have a shameless plug. I really, really appreciate you guys listening in some ways to my conversations about identity. But did you know that chatting isn't the only thing I do? I love to paint. And now you can have a bit of my art in your house. It also makes great gifts, by the way. So check it out at aubreyjeanart.etsy.com. That's aubreyjeanart.etsy.com. And also hit me up on Instagram at my handle, aubreyjeanart. I'd love to hear from you. Welcome to 132nd Cherokee, a podcast exploring why being 132nd of a bloodline is meaningless. And surprisingly not at the same time. I'm your host, Aubrey Jean. With me today is my friend, artist, cat lover, and sender of memes, Jenny. Jenny's relationship to culture is unique because she was raised in a separate culture than her birth. So I ask her why she identifies with one culture or the other. Just a caveat, the audio is weird on this episode. Sorry about that, dudes. I'm still trying to figure it out. Anyway, hope you enjoy 132nd Cherokee with my friend Jenny. It connected. Hello.
It did. Hello.
How are you?
Good. I mean, I have a headache, but that's beside the point.
I'll edit that out, so it'll be fine. Just kidding. I popped you onto my podcast because you texted me something about which culture, white or Asian. What was that text about?
Oh, well, I mean, you said something about having a kinship to a culture that you weren't raised in. And I mean, I was raised in white culture. Obviously, well, not obviously, because this is a podcast and you don't know what I look like.
She looked like an Asian person.
I am an Asian person. I mean, I've been accused of being multiple things. I'm not. Like, some people think I'm Pacific Islander, which is a form of Asian, and some people have said that I look Hispanic, and some people have said I look Native American, which is fine. I think it'd be interesting to be all those things, but I am actually Korean, and it is awesome. I was raised in white culture, and so.
And why was that? Would you
I'm
be willing
adopted.
to share?
Yeah, so I'm adopted, and so I got shoved on a plane when I was a baby, and fortunately there was somebody to watch me while I was making my way across the ocean. And
they just put on the plane, like no name tag or anything.
I mean, there's this whole like family story my parents love to tell, and my uncle loves to tell, about how my plane got rerouted. It was supposed to land in Portland or somewhere near Portland, which was where my parents were, but there was fog, and so I got rerouted up to Seattle, which was where my uncle was, and so he's very proud to say that he delivered me. I was born in 1985, and so growing up in the early 90s, there really wasn't any cultural meetings or conferences or anything, and I don't really know. I mean, they exist now. Like, you can look up like support groups, or there are conferences that go on all over the US all the time. So it's not like just once a year, where you can meet up with other adoptees, or specifically adoptees from your country, just other people from your country. So like if I wanted to meet with people from Korea that have immigrated over from Korea, or they were raised in Korean households, I could hypothetically meet with other people my age or older people, and they could kind of expose me to this culture that I wasn't raised in. So
I get you, cultural meetings. I was going to make fun of you because I was thinking, like, you mean like the the Native American Association that I had in college? Like, where if we would just thought like this culture was cool, we could go and join the association. Like, they don't have that in Idaho.
Have that in Idaho. Like, when I was in high school, they had a Japanese club, but I wasn't.
Yeah.
It was mostly for the kids who were learning Japanese, like they were taking the Japanese language class. I always wanted to just go to the club meetings because they got to like eat all the pocky and watch all the anime.
Food is so delicious. I love how cultures have different foods.
Food is love. Okay, so have you gone to any of those now? Like those adopted meetings?
No, my brother wants us to go together. There's a very
Because why?
large, my brother is adopted too. So we're not blood related, but he was adopted from Korea 2 years after I was adopted.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean, I don't think it's a driving force in his life, but he's definitely interested in connecting with the culture of our birthplace. There's this thought in the back of our heads, and it's just been there forever. We never discussed it as kids, but it was just always there of like someday we're going to go back to Korea and try to find our birth parents.
Mm.
And that comes with a whole host of complicated feelings and thoughts and emotions and stuff, but
Because you
um
told me a little bit about that would be super hard for you in Korea.
it would. So I mean, just hundreds, thousands of kids were shipped out of Korea. They were like, get them out. And
Mm.
um during
The
the
plane
80s and
flown by a Korean baby.
yeah. During the 80s and 90s, it was like I mean, obviously they must have had pretty strict guidelines as far as appropriate families to place you with, but once you were put in an orphanage in Korea, or once a family gave you up for adoption, or once you were flown out of the country and you have a family, that's pretty much the end. There's a period at the end of that sentence and you can't go back. I mean, you can go back, but the records were not like super well kept in the 80s and the
Mm.
90s. I think it was very common, and this is just supposition. I don't have any facts to back this up, but I think it was very common for young unwed mothers to just come and drop off their babies. There was no questionnaire, there was no background information, no family medical history taken, no contact info in case of emergency, nothing like that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really difficult to go find records of any family members. It's difficult when you don't speak the language or write the language or read the language. Um, it's not inexpensive, if you're going back with the
Yeah.
sole purpose of finding my birth mother or something, it would be not only the price of like the plane ticket to get back to Korea, but also the cost of all the research you'd have to do on the ground, either by yourself or hiring a proxy. So if I were over here in Idaho and I hired somebody back in Korea to just start researching my birth records, it would be
Mm-hmm.
expensive and it'd be hard. You'd have to find a translator. And there are resources available for adoptees, but it's time consuming and it's expensive. And it's one of those things that my brother and I were kind of like, well, we have time. We'll think about
Yeah.
this when we've either processed some things or when the pandemic isn't going on and we can safely go back.
Right.
Maybe when there isn't a giant earthquake in Japan and it's kind of iffy to travel to Asia. And like, there's always reasons.
Is
So,
there a part of you, so this like cultural identity you have, this genetic identity you have, but not having, like you said, not having the language, not having the
mhm.
connections, um, like the network there, is that that's logistically daunting. Is that also emotionally daunting?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I have been to Korea before, but I really did not plan it out well.
Mm.
I mean, I planned it out in the sense that I knew a year before I went that I wanted to go and I needed to save the money, and I had a friend there that I could stay with and all that kind of stuff. Excuse me.
For anyone
Um,
listening, that was her personal robot to let her know her lasagna was ready.
back in your cage. So
Poor robot.
uh, there is no sympathy for robots on this podcast. Uh,
That's the
Um,
name of this episode.
and all my friends are white.
Oh, yeah. Oh, dang it. So many things to choose from.
So yeah, I have been back to Korea, but I didn't plan it in the sense of like I purposefully didn't plan it in the sense of I want to possibly reconnect with any biological family I have left. I did not look into
Mm.
the adoption agency that I went through. I didn't reach out to anybody. And my mom had all the information that she possibly can as far as like, this was the adoption agency. This was the person that came over with you on the plane. Like, if you want their name and you contact the adoption agency and say, this was the person that came over with me on the plane, what else can you tell me about my origin story? Um,
Yeah,
but I
like a
purposefully
superhero.
did not look into any of that when I went to Korea. For me, it was like a vacation. It was this exotic vacation to this land of amazing food and K-pop idols. I was scared. Like I barely stepped a toe out of Seoul, which Seoul is a giant city anyway. I spent 2 weeks there, and I easily could have spent longer just in Seoul. Well, that's for another podcast. I went outside of the city once to go to a very specialized exotic park.
Wait,
But
what?
other than that, I really didn't
We're just gonna
leave.
gloss over that, guys. Don't worry, I will get the deets and I will let you know in the comments section.
When I was there, I met with my friend. She's an English teacher, and her friends, who are also English teachers, and one of them happened to be a Korean adoptee. And so
Oh,
I only met with him once. It was in the context of everybody having dinner together, and I kind of regret. I felt very ditzy. He was saying, "Oh, Alana tells me that you're Korean too. I see it in your face." I decided to come to Korea to teach English because I wanted to look into my origin story. I wanted to reconnect with
hmm.
my adoptive, like my birth family. I wanted to talk to the agency, and it's nearly impossible to do that from, I don't remember where he was from. I want to say Iowa or something like that. He's like, so that's why I came. Are you going to do something like that while you're here? I know you're only here for 2 weeks, but if you need help, I can put you in contact with people that I talk to. And at the time, I was so embarrassed because I did not even ask my mom the name of the adoption agency we went through before I left. I had no idea. I was just flat in denial, and I was like, "Oh, I know how to get into hold of you. I can reach out through my friend if I change my mind." But honestly, it wasn't a matter of changing my mind. It was a matter of I had not prepared myself to do anything in that sense. For
Did
me,
you not prepare?
I think subconsciously I deliberately did not prepare.
Subconscious is a bugger.
Yeah. So it was all about eating all the foods, being surrounded by people that looked like me, and I did not consciously think about it until I had a very bad day. I had a extremely difficult day when I was in Seoul. At the end of the day, it was like a comedy of errors. Like everything that could have gone wrong went wrong in that day. I had planned all these things out and none of them really came to fruition. And at the end of the day, I was supposed to meet my friend for the Lantern Festival, except I had forgotten the cell phone that actually works in that country at her house. So I was
Yeah.
like, maybe I'll just be able to find her. She's a white person in a country of Asians. I'm sure she'll stick out. And
It's
so
a
I just
little bit
went to
it's a little bit
where
diluted.
the festival was, and I couldn't find her. And I was just so tired from this horrible, terrible, no good, very bad day.
Mhm.
And I had like tripped. So I had skinned my knee and I'd spilled some coffee, which I thought was tea because I don't drink coffee. And I was just like so upset. I was like, I'm upset. I'm going to sit down on this curb and I'm going to cry. And this festival was going on. This parade was going past me with all these beautiful fairy women in gorgeous hanboks and carrying glowing, colorful lanterns, and they just looked like something out of a K-drama. And this lady breaks out of the pack, and she's like a middle-aged Korean woman in a traditional hanbok with this gorgeous glowing lantern. And she comes over to me because I'm sitting on the curb like a goober, crying over spilled coffee. And she just hands me this lantern and smiles at me and then like floats gently back to her place in the parade. And
Aw.
it just like smacked me in the middle of my eyes. I was like, that could have been my birth mother for all I know. And it just
Oh,
like shocked me to my core because I had not allowed myself to think about things in those terms.
it's interesting that you say that you had not allowed yourself to think about it in those terms. Like it was something you were avoiding, maybe to protect yourself. Not really where you fit in Korea, but
If I went back to Korea now, I could feel like I was fitting in the sense that I could ignore the looks that people give me on the subway that say, you're wearing a tank top. Women in Korea don't wear tank tops. That's inappropriate. You're overweight. Women in Korea don't just walk out in public overweight without kind of covering themselves in shame because looks are very important to Korean women. And that's
Mhm.
very generalized, but
Sure,
you know what I
sure.
mean? Like
Yeah.
it was very, very easy for anyone to tell that I did not belong there. And in fact, every interaction that I had with Korean people when I was not with my very Caucasian friend, um, was they already knew before I opened my mouth, before I said, "Oh, I don't speak Korean," or, "I don't know what I'm doing," or "Please help me," they already knew. They already knew I was American. They already knew that I didn't speak the language. It was in the way that I walk, in the way that I hold my body. It was in the clothes that I wore. And I'm not self-conscious enough to be able to blend in, and I don't think I would try to. So I can just ignore that. I can just say, yeah, I'm a foreigner. I look like you, but I don't look like you. But it doesn't bother me enough to do anything to change it, or for me to like shrivel up inside and feel really super alone in this country. At least probably 95% of the time. 5% of the time, it probably would penetrate my dense little brain enough to be like, oh, I don't belong here. Somehow, the majority of the time, when I'm surrounded by Asian faces, I'm more conscious of being other, even though I shouldn't. Like, I should look at other Asian faces and say, "Oh, I'm with my people. Oh, I'm with people that look like me." But because I was raised in middle class white suburbia, it's like
Mhm.
none of you guys have the same life experiences that I have, and we're not going to necessarily connect in the same way that I would connect with somebody on the bus on my way to work in Idaho, because we have the same life experiences here in Idaho. I went to the same high school as you. I eat the same foods as you. I get really ridiculously excited about the Fast and the Furious movies just like you.
Oh,
Um,
that's funny. Do you ever feel like an imposter?
I mean,
Like
I feel like an imposter both ways. I
you
feel like an
okay.
imposter in white culture when people remind me that I'm Asian, and I'm like, oh, that's right, I'm Asian. And I feel
Um,
like an imposter when I'm around other Asian people because I'm either not Asian enough or I'm not white enough. So if you put me with a bunch of Asians, if you put me with other Korean adoptees, we'd probably have a lot of the same life experiences. We'd have a lot of the same troubling encounters growing up, the same struggles with who am I? Who am I in the framework of all my friends or all my family, or um, dual citizenship or whatnot. But also, we ate hamburgers when we were younger. We didn't eat kimchi.
mhm.
We went to school and then we got out of school and then we went and played soccer, or we went home and watched cartoons. We did not continue going into secondary school and third school and special tutoring and all that stuff until midnight, like kids in Korea do. And so I have those same life experiences with other Korean adoptees, but then sometimes I'll meet another Korean adoptee and they'll say, oh, I went to the Holt International Korean Adoptee Conference in Austin last last year, and it was so amazing. And I made these contacts, and I started learning Korean. And you'll talk to somebody like that. I'm like, oh, you're trying to make a connection with your culture, and I am not. Like, I've taken Korean history classes. I've taken like a quick little Korean speaking language course. Um, I watch K-dramas. I eat Korean food every chance I get. But for me, it's like I'm a tourist. It's like
Mm.
I'm doing these things because it's exotic and it's interesting, and it's delicious or whatever. And I never felt an actual gut-wrenching connection to horrible things that have happened to Korean people until I took that Korean history class. And I feel that
Yeah.
gut-wrenching historical connection to um, African Americans during the civil rights movement when I was
Mhm.
listening to that stuff in history class, in American history class, kids or to people in the concentration camps in the Holocaust, and to Japanese people in the internment camps during World War II. And I feel that connection to those cultures and those people in those horrible situations.
Like, you feel connected because of human suffering,
Yeah, I guess so.
but it's not. But are you saying that it's not necessarily the connection you feel to Korea is not necessarily because of your genetic connection?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's not like I read a book about the Holocaust and I read a book about
The comfort women.
the comfort women, and I don't feel more of a connection to the comfort women because it happened in and to Korean people.
Mhm.
I don't feel like, oh, these are my people. Yeah, it's
When you
just the
were,
human condition that gets me.
yeah, when you were young, was there ever a point where where was the point when you were young where you were like, my parents are white, everybody's white, my brother kind of looks Korean, I'm Korean? Was there ever that?
I don't think anyone tried to hide it from us.
When I was among like immigrant communities and stuff in Washington, D.C., I spent most of my time with people who had immigrated from like South and Central America. And so I saw people all the time that objectively looked differently than I looked. But then I didn't really, there's came a point where I was just so immersed in cultures and languages that I look at my skin and then be like, what the, this is white. Like, it would be this weird jarring sense that I was other, and that for some reason my mind had slipped into something of what I at least attributed to as this like cultural connection with them. And so I wonder if you were ever like looking at all these white people at Christmas and you look down and you're like, what the, I'm Korean.
That only ever happened, at least to me, I can't speak for my brother, but that only ever happened when we started going to school. So when
Okay.
we were kids, all all my friends were white. All my family was white. Um, but it wasn't my mom loves to tell stories about us as kids, our origin stories, how we were such a blessing to her and dad, all this stuff. And she kind of jokingly, not jokingly, says that she finds Asian kids cuter than white kids. And I'm like, you're serious. And so it wasn't like it was a secret at family gatherings. It was like none of the cousins asked us any awkward questions. I think they had probably been briefed by their parents. Like, now prepare yourself.
Yeah.
So we never had any kind of sense of standoffishness from our cousins. And most of my cousins were older than us, so it wasn't like they were running around with us anyway. Aunts and uncles, they would treat us like any of the other cousins. My favorite uncle, I won't name him because that would make all the other uncles jealous, but he knows who he is.
He knows. Bob, that's you.
My dad's name is Bob.
Oh, dang it.
My favorite uncle, he's the one that quote unquote delivered me to my parents. He loves that story. He loves reminding me that
Yeah.
he was the first person in America to touch me, and that he
Aw.
drove like 3 hours and waited in the airport for so long to get me. And then I was really upset all night, and so he stayed up with me all night when I was a baby, just like rocking me. And
Aw.
he feels that connection to me both as like a parental figure, and also in the sense that I think he feels very protective towards me. I was just this helpless baby, and I was dumped in the US unceremoniously from an airplane.
Yeah.
And I was helpless, and I
Yeah.
was foreign, and obviously I didn't know anybody here. I was too young to understand what anybody was, but I think he feels that keenly, and he has always been very protective of me. And so I think the only familial sense of other that I ever got growing up was when my parents would tell those stories, the story of
Mm.
my deliverance, my really
Dude.
didn't do anything abnormal as kids that was like, oh, remember that time that Jenny did that thing that was very Asian? Like, they don't have any stories like that.
And what would that even be?
I don't either, but obviously it never happened because it's not part of the narrative in our family. So we didn't
Is
get that.
feeding people very Asian? Is that like an Asian thing? Because you feed a lot of people all the time. You feed me all the time.
I don't know. I do hear that it's a very Asian thing, but since I wasn't raised in that culture, I just disregard people who say that. I'm like, my mom, bless her heart, according, in your language. My
In my
mom is
language, yeah.
not like a come one, come all, let me feed you kind of nurturing person. It was like, if I had a friend over after school at a certain point, my mom would be like, all right, they got to go. It was not why does your friend want to stay for dinner, So I did not get it from my mom.
That's funny. We could have a whole podcast about your mom, probably.
Oh my gosh.
Question. So, okay, so bringing it back to me, because this podcast is more about me than you. Do you ever have a thought, like in the future, pursuing or diving deeper into Korean culture? Okay, so just like applying it right to me, I have this genetic connection to being Cherokee,
Mhm.
but it's way less than you compared to you in Korea. But parallel, like looking forward, this is a culture that we were not raised in. We don't know much of, so we are starting to look at these cultures and do our research with them. In the future, what are your thoughts about adopting this culture more into our lives?
Bring it into my life, or like all of you American culture?
No. I'm talking about you. Like, so yeah, you're in your experience. So are you considering being more Korean? I'm going to edit this out. Yeah, are you considering looking, forward in your life and just like having more things, not just food, but just like having, adopting more things, more Korean culture?
I think it would be really difficult. I think if I were to do something like that, it would require me to move back to Korea. It's so
Ooh,
difficult
yeah.
to adopt so much of that culture into my life when my life is surrounded by American white culture.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, I mean, like one of the really core components of Korean culture is family. Family is already really important to me, but I'm not looking to move my parents in with me anytime soon.
Or to Korea. You're like, parents, guess what's happening now?
Or to move back in with them, and they probably don't want that either. In Korean culture, like that's really important. Like you have
Yeah.
that family unit, and it's it's usually like 3 generations. It's
Yeah,
kids
the
and parents
multi-generational.
and grandparents. Yeah. And so that creates a very specific day-to-day culture that I can't replicate. So there's like a lot of Korean culture things that are very hard to replicate in the US, especially as a single person, because culture is many people,
Right.
many people doing the same things, many people interacting in specific ways. I would never want to adopt the Korean drinking culture. I'm not a drinker.
Right.
If that were a thing here, I would just rage quit. I would like when you started in a new company, the boss and your coworkers are expected to take you out drinking, and they're supposed to,
Oh my gosh.
like, it is rude to refuse. And I would
Get you.
I would just like be like, no, I do not want to go. I want to go home and take off my pants and sit with my cats and eat ice cream from a pint. Like, I don't want to go out drinking. But there is
Were you the one that showed me those videos?
of drunk people in public
Yes.
places.
Yes. Yes, that was, yeah, you showed me those videos. That is, all right, well, I was just gonna, this is not a podcast where we're gonna dog on other people's cultures, but that is a very strange part of a culture to me that it doesn't sit, it's not my cup of tea.
Yes.
It's not my shot of whiskey.
Right. And I have no idea how introverts do it over there. I don't know if they're just like conditioned from an early age of like, this is just how it's going to be and you just got to suck it up. I don't know.
Now, do you and your brother feel like you think more connected because you're both Korean? Or is it just because he's your brother and you love him? Like, if he were Martian, do you think you'd feel like love him as much?
I think if he were Martian and adopted, I would love him as much. Well, okay, I'm not saying that I wouldn't love him. If my brother and I have been close since we were babies. We've always been extremely close, and my mom is so proud of it. She loves to tell stories about how when we started going to school, I would be in first, second grade, and he'd be in kindergarten, or maybe first grade and he'd be in kindergarten. And when we got off the bus at school, I'd hug him and kiss him, and then we'd go our separate ways. And
That is so cute.
and let me tell you, we were the cutest little Asian kids.
Oh.
But I mean, obviously, you get older, and it's especially harder on the younger sibling. When we got into high school, he decided to go to a different high school because I had already been there for 2 years. I had established a reputation. I was the cool teacher's pet. And that was real hard on my brother.
Oh, man.
So, there were certain ways in which our paths diverged. I think that if Andy had been our parents' blood child, so it doesn't matter what he looks like, but I think that connection of being adopted definitely bound us closer together. And I don't think it would have mattered if he was from Cambodia or Martian or China, or he was almost Chinese twins, is what my mom likes to tell us all the time. Like, we almost got these Chinese twins after we got you, but then something fell through and Andy popped up on the register and we're like, we'll take that one. And Andy never knows what to say to that. Lucky. He's like, thank you.
Like I was just next in line, I guess.
Yeah. They flipped the page in the Kmart brochure, and there he was.
That's funny.
But
well, Jenny, do you have anything else to talk about that I should have asked you and I didn't?
No, absolutely not.
I love talking to you, and I think maybe we should just do a podcast together and talk about whatever.
We should. All my friends are white.
Yeah, why not? I kid you not. That's going to be the name of this episode. So, I love you, Jenny.
Love you.
One 30-second Cherokee with Aubrey Jean, and with all the favors I can cash in. Produced by me, Aubrey. Executive produced by nobody, because I don't know what that means. The Anchor app by Spotify holds my hand for all the engineering. The music is also found on Anchor. You can rate and review this show on many podcast platforms someday, and you might find your review featured on a future episode. Or I might burn it in effigy. Got comments? Send me a message at anchor.fm/Aubrey-Jean. That's anchor.fm/Aubrey-Jean.